Hey guys, and welcome to this new video. Quite a couple of you guys seem to have problems with authentication and registering users in the Framework7 app. So I thought maybe a tutorial will help here. Um, the biggest problem with authentication is to make it really secure. And I work for IBM Security, so I really know what I'm talking about. Um, this is not an easy task normally. So I'm going to try to make this as simple and easy as possible. The trickiest part usually is to store the user safely, securely in a database, which involves a lot of know-how on encryption, salting hashes, stuff like that. But we're not going to touch on that because instead of building everything from scratch, like database structure and a backend, everything, instead we will use a service called Firebase, which is provided by Google, and they have user authentication built in, which is really easy to use and it only takes a few minutes. So let's dive into and see how it goes. Okay, so let's dive into this right away. The first thing you need to do is just log into Firebase and just use your regular Google account, and you should be good to go. And here we are. So this is just the the welcome page. So what you have to do is click on console on the top right corner, and it will bring you to this like setup page where you can create like new projects and stuff. So go ahead, create a new project, name it whatever you want, click on continue. I usually turn off Google Analytics because I don't want Big G to track me. So click on next. This usually takes a little time. I speed this up for the purpose of this video. But when it's done setting everything up, you're here in your project overview page and create a new web app. Don't create an iOS or Android one. Well, actually you can do if you want to do that, but for this demo, we're gonna create a web app. You don't have to copy this source code because we're installing the library which is used for Firebase through npm. The code you just saw would only be like for static websites. All right, so if you click around a little here, you can see that Firebase offers a lot of different authentication methods like email password, Google login, Facebook, Twitter, whatever. For this demo, we're going to use email password authentication and Google authentication. Okay, but if you learned how to do work with these two, believe me, the rest is going to be super easy, and like it's not different to what I'm going to show you here in this video. Okay, so let's look around a little here. You can see your project name, your ID, and there's a web API key. So keep in mind where to find this one because you're going to need it later. But yeah, that's pretty much it for setup on the console. Let's go to our terminal and install Framework7 first. So make sure that you have the -G option set if you haven't installed it yet. I already have it, so I just call Framework7 create a new application. I just pick a simple web app this time. We're going to use Vue.js. It's a single view, and we just use plain CSS. No Sass or any fancy stuff. And it's done. So let's just open our code editor. I'm going to use VS Code, but you can choose whatever you like. And here's our project. So nothing fancy in here, just a standard Framework7 project with all the source files. Images are in assets, components, CSS, stuff like that. Here's our indexed HTML page. Nothing you have to change here, but we're going to delete a couple of those pages which we're not going to need. So I'm going to delete everything except for the 404 page and the home page. Okay, now that the files are deleted, we also need to remove all the imports in the routes.js file, and we also need to remove the references to the routes. So that's probably like most of the stuff that you see in this file. So keep only what you need for the home page and for the 404 page, which should look something like this. Okay, so far so good. So let's go to our home.view file and clean that up a little. So you do see a lot of markup code here, which is mostly just demo code from Framework7, to get you started. But we're gonna not need most of this stuff as we're pretty much starting from scratch. So all we're going to do is we're gonna keep the navbar on the top, but pretty much remove everything from the content. We're also going to remove the toolbar as we don't need it. Yeah, and the rest pretty much fine. I think we're going to remove a couple of the buttons in the navbar too, but the navbar itself we would like to keep. If you want, you can give it a title, call your app whatever you want, and we're going to just call it Framework7 auth example in this case. And yeah, I think your template's ready to go. So let's fire up terminal. And just type in ls and check everything is looking fine. But I think we're ready to rock, so let's start our project for the very first time. So enter npm start to run the start script, and it should compile your application, and then open your web browser on localhost 8080. May take a couple of seconds, but eventually it should show up with something like this. I'm using the the iPhone emulator here in Chrome, but you can use actually a real device if you want, or you can use an Android emulator, whatever you want. So let's go ahead and type some test output here, hello world, and see if that works. And yes, you get your UI auto updated. Next thing, you just install Firebase. So just type in npm install Firebase. Don't forget dash save to update your package.json, and give it a couple of seconds to update. Okay, so let's write some code, shall we? So this is just going to be like a regular Vue.js component, nothing too fancy. So go ahead and open a script tag, import Firebase from Firebase. And you also want to import the Firebase-auth library here, which we're going to need for authentication, obviously. Okay, good. So let's continue. Just export a default object literal, as you would do in most Vue.js projects. Create a data method. We're going to need that for a data binding. We need a methods object. We're going to need the mounted lifecycle method, which obviously gets fired when the component got mounted. The data method needs to return an object literal, and we're going to start with a user object. Now this user object will be null if the user is not logged in, and if the user is logged in, there will be actually an object in here, and it will return like all the all the states of that user. Is he like what's the email address, what's his name, and so on. So we start with a null value, and in the mounted component here, we'll basically initialize the whole project. So we need some configuration. And as I said before, you need to get the web API key. So go into project settings in Firebase, copy the web API key, as you see here, and paste it in here. I call it API key, but you can call it whatever you want. And you're also going to need the project ID here. So you're going to paste that in, and you need add .web.app. Okay, don't forget to do that. So it's your ID and .web.app. Okay. Okay, dokie. So let's use our configuration. So we're going to initialize Firebase by calling firebase.initializeApp, and we pass in our configuration object. Next, we're gonna listen to an event listener, which is called on-auth change. And this is like a super, super cool feature of Firebase. So whenever a user logs in or logs out, this event will be called. And this is super awesome because at every state of your app, is the user logged in or not. So we're going to listen to this and set this .user to user. So obviously we can use the user property in our data object that we have set to null before, remember? And now we can, access it from anywhere in our Firebase app. Yeah, so this is the user object that I talked about, which we assign the current user to. So I think we're ready to actually create some, something actually visible. So let's write some markup in, classic Framework7 Vue.js manner. So we're going to start with a block, and we're going to use VIF. So that means this element is only shown if the user is not null and not undefined. So the user object has to be existing. So that means we only show this element if the user is logged in. Okay, and we're going to use an else block later to show some part of the UI for the user when he's not logged in. But this is like super simple and super handy. Because based on the on what state the user object is, and you get a different view in the UI, which is totally awesome. So as you can see, I've added a logout button, which basically just calls the onLogout method when clicked. And now that the if block is done, we also create an else block, which shows the part of user interface when the user is not logged in. So we're going to keep this really simple. We just create a form element, probably add like 2 input elements for the username and a password and a submit button. But that's mostly it. So I'm going to speed this up a little because this is just standard Vue.js stuff. So if you need to learn more about Vue.js, just check the documentation. There are a couple of cool examples in the form about the form. Yeah, but this is nothing too fancy. So in order to start this, we're going to assign a class to this. Call it login list. Same for the input. Call it email input. The most important part is that we're going to do some data binding here. We're going to bind this input value to a property which is called email. So we have to add this to our data property later. And we're going to do the same thing with our password. And also we can add a couple of like placeholders, and there's also a label property. These are just for decoration, so they look pretty. You don't have to add these. What I do recommend is to add the type, so type equals password, and last but not least, add a login button. Okay, so I think we're ready to test our application. So we're going to call npm start, let it compile and see how it goes. And yeah, here we are. Doesn't look too bad. So we have our 2 input methods with the labels and the placeholders, but we do have a couple of errors here. So probably nothing too bad. So as we can see, we've tried to bind the password and the email data property, but we haven't defined it yet in our data. So we still have to do that because otherwise, Vue just isn't gonna like it and throw a couple of errors. So just go ahead and add those email and password states into the data property. We're gonna assign like empty strings to it. And now if we restart, the problem should be gone. And yes, this has worked. But there's another error. So it's kind of related to the methods object. So let's look into that. So yeah, so methods need to be an object literal and not a method itself. And saving this should fix the issue. Okie dokie, so now that it's fixed, we can continue with our user interface. So the first thing we're going to do is create a new block, which is only shown if the user is not logged in. So we're going to use this for like the registration process. So that means if the user doesn't have an account yet, he or she can sign up to this. So basically, we're going to need a button which the user can click, and then it will reveal a sign up form. Okay, so we only show this button if show sign up form is false. So this is a data property we're going to add to our data later. All right, next we add a simple form. So this is going to be very similar to what we've seen before. we attach an event handler and call it on sign up clicked. You can add the action method properties, but you don't have to, I think. I always do it because I'm kind of used to it. And within the form, we add a Framework7 list, which is gonna, wrap our input elements, and we only show it if a property called show sign up form is set to true. We don't have set up that, but we're gonna do that in a few seconds. And then, yeah, pretty much the same as we did before. We add an input element for the email. The only difference is that we assign a different data property to this. So we call it email underscore sign up. And we're going to do the same thing with the password and call it password underscore sign up. And the reason for this is we don't want to bind the email and password data properties to this, because those are used for the login. Remember, that's the part of the code we've written before this. So this part is for the sign up. So that's why we go and use the underscore sign up name for those variables. But other than that, this is not very different. Okay, so I think this is done. So let's save it and see if it works. And it looks pretty good. So we do see our button, but if you click it, nothing happens. And it's throwing a couple of errors here. So it looks like the show sign up form is not bound, and this is just logical because we haven't defined it yet. So let's go to our data property in our view component and define it over there. There's no really like fixed position where you need to put it, but see, this is password underscore sign up, show a sign up form, and email underscore sign up. So these are the properties that we need, and just add it to our object that we return. We're gonna assign like empty strings for both for the email and the password sign up elements, and the show sign up form is a Boolean. So in this case, we're going to set it to false initially, save it, and see what happens. So we don't have an error anymore, but still, if we click the button, nothing happens, right? So that's a problem. But it's kind of weird that we don't see an error here. So let's have a closer look into our code, because I'm not exactly sure why this isn't working yet. But I'm pretty sure we will fill it. Oh yeah, so I see it. So in the event listener for the click, we're setting show sign form to true, but it should be show sign up form, right? So that's just a small typo. So if we click the button yet now, it will finally show our sign up form. So you will be able to enter your username or your email address, choose a password, and then we can sign up the user. We don't have a button yet for signing up actually, so we need to add that. But that's not, no rocket science, should be pretty easy. Just add the Framework7 button, and whenever the button is clicked, the submit event of the form is called, and that's pretty much it. Obviously, we use the VF equals show sign up form tag here because we only want the the button to show up when this value is set to true. So saving this, try again, and yep. So now we have our button, add some username. So since we have set the type to email address, our browser will do an automatic validation if this is a valid email address. And if we click the sign up form now, it says on sign up click is not a function, where this is logical because we haven't defined the function yet, but we were referencing it in our event listener. So let's go to the methods object of our view component, and we need to add our event listener here. Okay, so the first one is on sign up clicked. So this is just it's a simple function. I'm going to add all the events that we've defined before. So might have to look some part-ups up in your markup. Actually, the best thing probably is to just copy and paste them. I've typed them out and just hoping that there are no typos. But yeah, so I'm gonna do an e.prevent default because I don't want the form to to forward us to any websites. Um, and now here Firebase comes in place. So we use the create user with email and password method. So now that's a mouthful, but basically it's Firebase it's a Firebase method that lets us create a new user. We pass in the email sign up and the password sign up properties from our data property. Um, and if an error occurs, we are going to call the .catch and print the error to console. And we're also going to notify the user. So the handy part here is that Firebase does provide an error.message property. And if something goes wrong, it will actually return you a message that the user can actually understand. So in this case, we have typed in password, which is too short. So Firebase is able to detect this, and you can just print out the error.message property of the error element, and it will return actually something that makes sense. Okay. So let's try this with a longer password and with an email address which doesn't exist yet. So click on sign up user, and it's complaining now that the email address is already in use, but that's only because I clicked on the sign up button twice. So if you click it only once, it should be fine. And it also shows you the state, like you're logged in now. But we haven't set the logout event handler yet. So that's something we need to look into. So let's go back to our code and create a new function, which is an event listener, which is called when the logout button is clicked. And all we need to do pretty much is just call the according firebase.auth.signout function of the Firebase library. And also we're going to define a catch function, which is called when an error occurs. Now we're not going to bother to implement like a success event handler because there's pretty much nothing to do here. Keep in mind that we have set a dedicated event listener for the login logout event of Firebase. So in this case, when we call the sign out function, we simply assume that Firebase has logged out the user and that it just works, right? So let's have a look at this and see if it works. So we click on logout and it throws an error. So let's see what's wrong here. It says signout is not a function. Yeah, let's go back to our code, I would say. And okay, so the auth property is not a property, it's a method. Okay, so it needs two brackets. And that should fix the issue. Let's see if it works and click on logout and there you go. Okay, so that works, but we cannot log in yet, right? We have added functions to create a new account, but we don't have like a logging function yet. So let's implement our on logging with email clicked event listener. Which is called when the logging form is sent. So we're going to do a very similar thing as we did with a logout. So we call firebase.auth, and this time we don't forget the brackets, and we use the sign in with email and password method. Oh my god, why do these method names have to be so long? I swear, next time I'm going to do a library, I'm going to use shorter names. However, so this time we're going to use an error handler and a success handler because in the success handler we need to pretty much set the new state of the user. The catch part gets an error argument within the function. So yeah, let's start implementation. All we have to do is now to pretty much handle the event when the user wants to log in. So we get result object from Firebase, and within this Firebase result object, we get the user who has logged in. So all we do is we set this.user to firebase.auth.currentuser.user, which tells Vue.js that we have a new user object in our data. And if an error happens, we simply log it out. We print out an error message and the error element. Also, we want to give like a sensible error message to the user. So since Firebase is quite good at this, we just use the error.message property of the error argument and print it out as an alert. So let's have a look. Yeah, just fill out a username, abc@abc.com. I think that's the user that we signed up before, and the password, and there we go. So this works. We can log in, we can log out, and keep in mind how simple this was. Pretty much all we do is call a Firebase method, update this.user, and that's it. Now here we can still see that the user exists. So if we sign up with the same email address, then Firebase will throw an error, return a sensible error message to the user. And if you want, you can even see in the console of Firebase which users are signed up yet and which are not. Okay, so I think we're pretty much done with the email login, logout, sign up part. And I promised you at the beginning of this video that I would also provide you like other login methods like Google login and Twitter, Facebook, whatever. For the purpose of this demo, we're just going to do Google login, and you're going to be blown away by how unbelievably simple this is. Okay, it's pretty much a one-liner of JavaScript code, and we're going to add a little bit of HTML here, so we can create like a button to log in, but it's going to be so super simple. So let's start by creating a new block for this authentication user interface. And we only show this block if there's no user logged in yet, right? Because if the user is already logged in, then we show the logout button. So we create a new title using the F7 block title element from Framework7. You don't have to do this. I find it quite, quite realistic because I feel like this is something that most websites do. And then we simply add a button with a red color and fill it. You can use like the official Google sign-in button. I think if you search for it, you can find it somewhere. But I think this is close enough. So let's just use this one. Add an event handler called on Google login clicked and give it a label. So here we have it at the bottom. It's called sign in with Google. Obviously, if you click it, there's not much happening yet. But UI-wise, we're done. Okay, there's nothing else you have to do, especially because you don't need any sign up. Because if you already have a Google account, then you just log in, and if you don't have one, you would go to google.com and sign up there. So that's why you just don't need that. And yeah, let's just copy and paste our event listener name, create the function, and you're going to be blown away how easy this is. So the first thing we're going to have to do is create a new provider. Now, a provider tells Firebase what type of authentication you would like to do. So in this case, we use a Google Auth provider. If this was Twitter or Facebook or whatever, we would use a Twitter auth provider or Facebook auth provider. And yeah, but in this case, we use Google. And next, we just call a sign it with redirect method and pass in the provider project. And that's it, guys. All you need to do. And you have your sign with Google method. And if you click the button, you will get redirected to the Google website. And over here, the user can choose, hey, which account do you want to use to log in? I only have one, so I'm going to use this one. And yeah, that's as you can see, that's it. The Firebase had always taken care of it. It knows that you have logged in through Google. You can even get some data of that Google account, like the name and email address and stuff like that. All you have to do is just access the user object that it returns. But that's it, guys. I can't believe how simple this is. I mean, if you had to code all this stuff on your own, I promise you, it would take you days probably. In this case, it's just 2 lines of code and it's super easy. However, one thing I want to add at the end, this is just eye candy, but I think from a UX perspective, this is really useful. So when the app starts, there's not much happening in the beginning, right? So It's kind of checking if the user is logged in or not logged in. So what we're going to do is create a so-called loading spinner or thrower or whatever you call it. And when the app starts, we fire up the spinner, and when the auth status has changed, we close it. Okay. So let's see if this works. Obviously not. There's an error here. Cannot read property dialog. Why that? Oh, I see it. So it's $fsend.dialog provider. But yeah, this component is already built into Framework7, and as you see, there's the screen goes kind of dark into a model version, and then the spinner starts to turn. Here it says loading, and I think this is kind of useful because you don't want users to mess around with your user interface while Firebase is trying to determine if the user is logged in or not. So just give it a couple of seconds. Okay, so last but not least, let's add a little bit of styling. It won't be much. We're just gonna, remove a little bit of the padding on the list. So we're gonna use margin 0 so it doesn't have like any extra spacing on the top, on the bottom. And we were also gonna use the login list, and the UL before thing. it's kind of required because there's like an extra space on the top we want to get rid of. This is usually stuff that Framework7 has already set for us, but we don't need this extra spacing, so I just removed it. But that's pretty much it. I think the UI looks good, right? Okay, I think we were at the end of this video. I want to give you just a quick glimpse at the documentation of Firebase because there's just so much more stuff in there, and I feel like we're going to do a couple more videos on Firebase. So if you're interested in that, just let me know, put it in comments below. If you want to know about the authentication part, like how to authenticate with other services like Twitter, Facebook, Google, just click on authentication on the Firebase docs part, then click web, and then on password authentication. And as you can see, it will give you all the the necessary steps how to authenticate using email and password in this case. There are also other methods, but for the moment, I think the web part is the one that's most useful for this audience of this video, I guess. You only need the other parts if you want like native iOS or native Android support. Over here, we do have the Google sign-in methods, and you can also go for much more. Like we have Facebook, Twitter, GitHub, Microsoft, Yahoo, all these cool login methods. And they're all very similar. Like I think the only one which is a little bit different is Facebook, because you need to kind of register an app. There's a website for that on Facebook. But other than that, look at these methods. They're the same, right? They're firebase.auth.sign-in with pop-up or sign-in with redirect. And they're exactly the same methods that we have used in our app. I think we have used redirect instead of pop-up. I don't recommend to use pop-up because some browsers simply block them. So I would highly recommend to use sign-in with redirect as we've done that in our app. Okay, so that's the end of this video, guys. I hope this was super useful for you guys. If it was, hit the like button. It will really help me out. And if you want to see like more videos of this kind, I'm going to try to maybe create a Firebase series or so, because there's so much more stuff into Firebase that can be really useful for you to create these applications really quickly. Like imagine if you had to create an authentication backend yourself, you would have to actually write that backend, and you would have to set up a database, and you have to make sure that everything is secure, and you have to set up stuff like sending emails when the user is signed up, and to verify the email address. And it's going to take you, I would say, at least a week or two to make this really good, and Firebase gives you this stuff all out of the box, right? So If you're interested in more Firebase stuff, let me know in the comments and click on the subscribe button and hit the bell icon, because if you do that, you will get notified when a new video is uploaded and you can see it right away as the first one and get all the good stuff. And yeah, I think that's it. If you want, follow me on Twitter. I'm hanging out there sometimes. But other than that, have a good day. See you next time. Bye.